super fast version of the 5 things Jesus does to create growth and kind of
Yeah.
show you, yeah. And I want to show the opportunity that Christian business leaders and Christian ministry leaders have to create growth because we do it backwards, like almost exactly backwards. We don't do it the way Jesus did it.
Okay. Welcome to Answer the Call, the podcast where we help Christian professionals discern what they feel called to do and practically land a job or start a business that's aligned with it. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with my new friend, Brett Henderson, who is the founder and CEO of ClickMill.co, which is a digital marketing agency for private and Christian schools. And immediately upon getting to know you, Brett, also, hi, welcome.
Welcome. Yes. Hi.
Well, immediately upon getting to know you, I was so impressed with your style of doing business, with your professionalism. You're very serious and serious about your craft and technical. And I found that so refreshing, surprisingly, because when I was reaching out to a variety of Christian digital marketing agencies for help in my own business, um, I and like when I've done hiring in other capacities too, I find that Christians can be so relationally focused that, or so heavenly focused that they're no earthly good. And I just loved how you're like, I know what I'm doing. I can help you. Here's how it works. Let's
Yeah.
do it. And
Yeah.
so, anyways, I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. And once we, I think, had a secondary conversation, you mentioned, like, hey, I think about like a biblical view of success a lot. And I'm like, wow, obviously, because you've achieved so much. So I'm very grateful to get to learn from you on this topic and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you.
So, can you give us just a little background on, and then also casually drop that you live in Hawaii and why? I'm
Yeah.
curious on the story
Yeah.
there.
Sure. Sure.
How did you
Yeah.
come to
It's
start your own business?
suffering for the Lord,
For the Lord.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I went to Bible college in Florida for 4 years at a school that's not there anymore. It used to be called Florida Christian College, and then it got bought out by some other college. But so I did 4 years of Bible college, and I was initially going to be a youth pastor. So, went for 4 years on that. And during the summers at Christian college, I had applied to various different summer camps because I'm from Kansas initially, and it's not that exciting there. And so why not go somewhere better and have an adventure? And so I put in a lot of applications to different places, different Christian camps in Alaska and California and Texas and Hawaii, and happened to get accepted at a Christian camp in Hawaii. Awesome camp, works with the local kids, a lot of impoverished kids. And they said, "Hey, we got a cabin on the beach for you. You want to come out?" And I was like, "You bet." And so did
And you didn't
summers.
have to pay for it? Or
No,
did you
well, I
get
had to
paid
pay
for
for
it?
my flight. No, they paid $9 an hour. Some of the other camps were calling and they're like, "Well, you have to, like, Alaska, whatever the city in the middle of Alaska is." They're like, "No, you don't, there's no pay. And also it's $3,000 in flights." And it's like, I got a cabin on the beach in Hawaii, or, I'm gonna not make anything. Nah, I'll go to Hawaii.
You know
So,
how to live. You
yeah.
really know how to live.
So anyway, so yeah, they said they paid and all I gotta do is get a flight. So I took a cheap flight. And anyway, so worked in at that camp. It's called Camp Homalani, means heavenly home. I worked out there during summers for a number of years through college. And after my last year of college, I just started putting in applications and resumes with all of they call them corps in the Salvation Army, but just the churches in Hawaii, and just spent my summer out there putting in applications in all my free time. And God provided a youth ministry position, youth ministry director. So I was in Hilo, Hawaii for 3 years as a youth pastor, essentially, working with the students there. And really, honestly, by the end of that experience, I was really, really exhausted.
Mm.
And I did 4 years as for youth ministry, and they taught us how to grow a youth group, which is essentially we pray for growth and we hope for growth and we have faith for growth. And then you throw a lot of sugar and fun at kids, and that's how you build a youth ministry. And I I paid a lot of money to learn how to grow a youth group. And I think all of those things are good things. So I'm not, that's not a negative criticism. But what I found was, despite my best effort, that's not the only factor in the equation. And I was very confused. I was very burned out. And then my wife and I, at that time, we moved out of Florida because of health issues on her side of the family. And God brought us both back. We're now in Hawaii now. But getting to Florida, I was just exhausted and went into sales. God took me into a time of sales and marketing. But I was so confused. I was so exhausted. I wanted to be back in ministry, but I was just like, what did I do wrong? What was it that didn't work? Because, you put in 60 hours a week and you don't see growth. It's like, what is happening? And so God took me through a time of sales. I did 3 years of sales. I was quite bitter about it at the time. And then God provided ClickMill and started with that. I was working with another digital marketing agency, worked in a discipleship school for sales and marketing for a while. A lot of this was, two things at one time learning. Um,
Wait,
yep.
sorry, a discipleship school for sales and marketing? What?
Yeah, I got hired at a discipleship school at a very large church, and they needed more students in the discipleship school. It's like a gap year program where they train you to be a pastor if that's something you want to do.
Mhm.
And they're like, yeah, we need someone to come and do sales. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I've been doing sales for 3 years. And I get there and I'm like, where are the students I'm going to sell? Because I'm planning tours and I'm planning all this stuff. And then, of course, they say, oh, we don't have any of those. There's no leads, there's no students coming in. They're like, you got to do that. And I've never done marketing at that point. So I'm like, okay, I'm a marketer. And that's
Wow.
where I started marketing. And I just picked it up and started going. Um, and so from there, I got hired into a digital marketing agency with some believers at that church who did a lot of my initial training. And from there, I started ClickMill on the side with initially a lot of Christian ministries. My first 10 clients from cold emails, doing 400 a week by hand, um, were pastors, and I did Google Grants, and we still do a lot of Google Grants over here, even though we, technically are just private schools, but we still have a lot of those. So, uh,
Wow.
anyway, so quite a ride, but over that process of kind of transitioning from ministry and going more into entrepreneurship and sales and marketing, I really believe God has been showing me the difference between how the world sees growth and how the church sees growth, and then what actually works, um, and works in alignment with the Bible. So I think maybe that's a good summary of kind of where my kind of path has taken me.
It's amazing. And wait, this is completely not like professional development related, but
Sure.
what is your life like in Hawaii? Can you tell I need a vacation?
Sure. Um, well, Hawaii has ups and downs like anywhere else. It's very beautiful. It's 80. My parents will call and ask and say, "Oh, how's the weather?" And it's like it's the same. It's either raining or it's not raining, and it's, you know, 80 or it's 85. That's all there is. It's beautiful, palm trees, beaches are all over. It's what you would think. Maybe what a lot of people don't know about Hawaii is there's actually a lot of poverty. Especially the locals. A lot of them struggle. A lot of the children struggle. And then it's not what you would think of in the United States. Like if you go to Waikiki or something, it's all very fancy and it's what you would think of. But when you actually live here, it's not kept up really well. There's a lot of rust. A lot of things are kind of worn down. Services are very different. So if you want a plumber to come out, you might have to call for a week because we don't answer our phones out here. I mean, I do, but it's very different culture. It's very beautiful culture. There's a lot of pain in the culture, a lot of love in the culture. So it is definitely a place that needs a ministry. And so yeah, it's a little bit about Hawaii.
Thank you for sharing some of the negatives just so I could feel a little bit better about my
Yeah.
existence. But
Yeah.
one thing I do think you and I have in common is we both live in places that attract cults.
Yeah.
Like in Austin and
Yes.
Hawaii.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I watch a lot of documentaries and it seems like they all end up there.
Yes.
So, back to you. Back to the topic that I'd really like to explore as you have grown ClickMill into, how long have you been doing that now? It's been a good amount of time.
I think I'm going on 8 years with
Yeah.
ClickMill and then longer with marketing and sales and ministry, obviously. But yeah, about 8 years.
Yeah, and you have a great team, a huge internship program,
Yeah.
like so many cool things that you're up to, and a lot of it seems like professional success. And in that, especially branding yourself overtly as, well, letting people know that you're a Christian
Mhm.
and how that influences your business leadership and that you serve private and Christian schools. The topic of success tied to being a Christian business owner is kind of funny to me,
Mhm.
and it's been hard to navigate. Like, it's felt awkward to set income goals rather than just impact goals. But then, like, how do you
Yeah.
measure impact goals? And then when you can't
Right.
measure them, it's kind of like not very motivating.
That's right.
So, those are some of the challenges I've had. How have you thought about like a biblical view of success, and how has that
Yeah.
shaped the way you do business?
No, that's great. Well, I guess when I was growing up, and I grew up in the church, I've been in the church my whole life, but when I was young, even starting as young as 11, I had, an influential figure in my life handing me books on success and wealth and investing. And so I started out at like 11 years old reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill and a lot of these other books. And so, what you would think of as secular success. And you know, I've read so many of these books, I can't even tell you. I don't even know. But I recall, and I've got it behind me on this shelf down here. It's called The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. And I was very confused, I think, for a long time because it's these books they quote Bible verses. They're like, well, if you want money, if you want fame, if you want power, well, look at this verse. This verse says this, and it's like, well, are they a Christian or are they not a Christian? Like, is that what that verse is supposed? But these people are very wealthy and very successful, and they point to the Bible as a source to get these types of success. And that was very confusing for a long time. And looking back now, it's no surprise that those verses in the Bible can be used to accrue worldly success because God is the God who has the cattle on 1,000 hills. Like, all abundance comes from God. So even if a worldly person gets it, it's still from God and they're using his principles to get it. Now, I was reading a book, it's called The Law of Success. And it's like a 700-page brick by Napoleon Hill, who wrote
A
Think and Grow
brick.
Rich. And, it's like, if you want success, if you want this, if you want that, do this and this and this. And he can tell you how to get it. But I got through and and then at some point, it's like, do this to get success, whatever your definition of success is. And it occurred to me, I've been reading these books for years and nobody can define success. Nobody actually knows what it is. It's relative. And that is a very worldly definition. Well, if you want fame, if you want to be a pop star, if you want $1 million, whatever it is, you want power, well, that's success to you. Well, that's not true. Like, if there is a God, then God has some definition of success. And so that's this kind of where I started really wrestling with this idea myself. And so, some years later, I was reading a book by John Maxwell, where love John Maxwell. But he said the only thing you get to take with you is people. You don't get to take money, you don't get to take fame, you don't get to take power, you don't get to take the number of clients in your business or your net worth or any of this other stuff. The only thing you get to take with you is people. And that is the value. That's where the value is. When he says in the book, How to Influence People, he says, when I show up, I just want to be introducing a lot of people to Jesus. And that is what God values. And so God's value is not in this life, it's in the next life. Store up your treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, right? Another verse says, use your worldly wealth to buy friends so that you will be welcomed into eternal abodes. That one's fairly new for me, but you know, so it's not that worldly wealth isn't important. It's that it's not the end all be all of what success is. So I think one of the big differentiators between a biblical view of success and a worldly view of success is that worldly success is stored up in this life for its own sake. That is the end. You know, I want to retire and I want to have a lot of money and a lot of fame and a lot of power. And what am I going to do with those? For anyone who's studied investing, I love the subject of investing and macroeconomics and all the stuff. You get more money, fame, and power to reinvest to get more money, fame, and power. It is the ends in itself. And if that is what we're doing, then that's an idol. Now, to the degree that I build as a believer money or fame or power, you know, to then invest to continue to grow it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what's the end? Like, what am I doing? I want to reinvest that in the kingdom. I want to use the resources because it's just a tool. I want to use those resources to reinvest to build the kingdom. So if my resources are growing and growing because I'm a wise steward of what I have, and then I'm continually using that growth to funnel into the kingdom and build the actual nest egg, which is in eternity, then that is, I think, what actual biblical success is. So it's not a bad thing to have money or fame or power in this life, so long as that the ends is, you know, in what do I want to say, glorifying God with it, not doing whatever I think I want to do.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
it definitely resonates. There's a couple things that I wonder mainly at what point do you let yourself have a house that you really like?
That's great. Yeah,
And like, I know that it's God's money. How do you decide to just, like, once you have enough, accept a good gift of a nice car
yeah,
from him? That's a
yeah,
struggle for me because um, I uh, want to, I'm open to surrendering at any time. The number of times I've given someone my last dollar is like, well, it's not zero.
yeah,
and and I so I know that I'm willing to like give it up, but can I just like accept having not living in a shack and like actually living in a nice house? Um, I contrast that. Like I think the answer is yes, but then I have this image in my mind that kind of haunts me of when I was watching Schindler's List.
mhm,
Really hard movie to watch,
mhm,
but it's really good. It's like basically for anyone that's not familiar, it's about this guy that saves like 800 children from concentration camps by essentially buying them for his factory that's like not really real,
mhm,
to just save them from being exterminated. And in the last scene, he sees all the people that he saves. And as he looks all of them in the face and they're standing there after the war, he cries and he says, how many more would this car have
yeah,
bought? How
yeah,
many more would this pen have bought?
yeah,
And I'm like, whoa, that's hard. What do you
yeah,
think?
for sure.
Do you have like what's your reaction to those thoughts?
Yeah, I think that okay, so when I think of making decisions, because ultimately, and by the way, for those of you who are watching this, if I could tell you one subject to learn, it's decision making. And
Yes.
it's like, it's amazing to me that this isn't a subject that's taught. There are so many powerful decision making methods and models that we can use as believers in line with the Holy Spirit to get more fruit in our life. Like, it's shocking. I have a whole shelf. That's my decision making shelf up there. Because if I can just make good decisions on a can God do miracles in my life? Absolutely. And I want him and I've seen them. And also, that's the exception. And outside of those exceptions, my life is the result of my choices. And that's what Proverbs is all about. And so I want to make good decisions. But that to say, the word decision comes from the Latin word scissio, which is where we get scissors. It means to cut off from. And anytime I make a decision, I'm making a sacrifice. And so if I'm buying a car, I'm making a sacrifice. And if I'm taking that money and giving it to the impoverished, then that is a sacrifice too. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with having a nice car, and I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with taking that instead and giving it to, someone who needs it more than I do. Um, I think either of those are okay when we're living for the Lord. I think that if we're willing to sacrifice more now, I do think that there will be a reward later. And also, being a human, there is a limit to the amount of sacrifice that we can realistically take. And I mean, this is true when you look at anything like investing.
Yeah.
You know, I can live on two nickels and put all my money on the stock market and be rich in 50 years or something. But at what cost? I live in a shoebox and I eat, you know, Cheez-Its or something. Like
Yeah.
at some point, you've got to find the balance. And so I would say for me, it's a couple things. Number one would be, you know, number one would be what's the vision God's given me? And I would encourage believers to have bigger visions that are not realistic because, we're taught in school, it's like, well, hey, have a normal vision, have a normal career, but you don't need God for that. You're not going to live a powerful life for the Lord if you can do it in your own power. That's just your power. Well, I want to live a way bigger life than I could possibly live in my own power. And if that's the case, it's going to require, but I can get excited about it. If I want to reach 10,000 people for Christ in the next year, or if I want my business to make, I don't know, I'm just making numbers up here, but like, let's say $5 million a year so that I have more money to go give back and go help, like, let's just say interns that I have from Nepal and Kenya and Colombia and help them fund their churches. Why wouldn't I want to do that? But I'm going to need God for that. And but what that means is in order to get the more powerful vision, the more powerful blessing that I believe God has for my life and for the impact he wants to work through me in the kingdom, I'm going to be willing to sacrifice more. And I think that people don't sacrifice more because the destination they're going isn't really worth it. And we can think about, like, if I live in Florida and I'm like broke and I'm starting my career, because a lot of your readers or listeners are going to be starting their career, and I'm like, well, I'm going to go visit my mom in Georgia and I'm going to save up money for a year so I can go 200 miles across the border. Like, no, why would you? I'm going to save my, no, I'm just going to get a Starbucks. That's a boring trip. That's not fun. There's no passion. But if it's instead, it's like, no, I'm going to go on a mission trip to Kenya and meet up with my buddy Michael, and we're going to go and help the impoverished, but I need $5,000 or $10,000. You'll you'll run through walls to do that. You'll sacrifice a lot more to make it happen, and you'll muster all the resources you have. And then at the same time, assuming you're walking with God, then he's going to be blessing that. So I would say if your vision's big enough, you begin to lean on the power of God, and sacrifices you thought weren't worth it become worth it. And that's, again, I think it's good and better. Like, I don't, it's a question of where God's calling you. And then in my own life, it's like, I'm to the point now where it's like, I get to have some nice things, and that's okay. And when I'm asking God, it's like, hey, is it the time to buy this? I'm looking for my peace. And this is something that Joyce Myers talks a lot about. She's like, I won't even go down the aisle at the store. And, if I pull a can off the shelf and I lose my peace, that can's going back on the shelf because
Oh.
I want to be at peace with the spirit, with everything I do to the best that I'm capable of doing. And so,
Yeah.
if it's the car purchase or if it's a house purchase, I would love to own a ranch personally, but it's
You and
like,
me both.
that would be a big purchase. And I need to make sure that's in line with the will of God. And also, I want to be at peace when I make that purchase. And I'm not going to make it until I feel like God has released that to me, if he does. And
Mm.
so that's what I would say. And then the third thing, financially, and I think this is a great more natural indicator, because we're kind of talking more about supernatural and vision with God and peace with God. But you know, when you don't have to ask if you should buy it, then it's probably a fine time to buy it. Like, starting businesses, you're broke. And I was broke for a long time. We lived in tiny places, and my wife and I, we always wanted a dog. It's like, well, let's get a dog. Let's get a dog. And it's like, is it okay to spend a little money on a dog? Is it okay to add the dog food into the budget? Because this is like a big expense. Probably not, but I was out and
Yeah.
about like last week, and there's a dog right there. We've been talking about getting a dog. The expense, it's not like, I don't even, it doesn't even bother me anymore. So it's like,
Wow.
oh, I don't even need to think about it. Yeah, we'll be fine. And now it's
Yeah,
probably fine.
that's
We have a dog
interesting.
and we have a dog. Right.
Woo! That's
And so it's
exciting.
like one day you wake up and it's like, yeah, I can take that expense. It's not a big deal. And that doesn't affect what God is doing through me. That doesn't affect my ministry. It doesn't affect anything. I got peace with it.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
think from a financial perspective, that's how I would see it.
I really like this, and I completely resonate with, well, what I would rephrase as I think Christians should set the most epic goals on the planet
Yeah.
because our God told us that he could do immeasurably more than we could ask or even imagine.
Yes.
And he is the King of Kings that controls everything and is also miraculously, by his insane grace, working on our behalf
Yeah.
for the good what of us and all things like that's
Yeah.
crazy. And so
Yeah.
we should be, I don't know, craziest people on the planet, just go out there and do stuff for the Lord. And
I agree.
having a big vision, I absolutely loved what you said, is what allows you to stomach sacrifice. And I see that all the time as a career coach, that people want something really dreamy or but they don't really think that's possible, so they've practiced just setting themselves on a lesser vision. And so it's like, "Ah, well, I want a job to be marginally better than my current job, but in the marginally better, cool teammates, amazing mission
Yeah.
oriented company, I cannot accept any less than like $150,000 a year
Yeah.
and blah 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 and whatever."
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what if you started from a blank slate? I kind of like blank slate thinking of like,
Yeah.
what what is with God like the vision on my heart right now? Like, what's the most epic thing that I could do for his kingdom? And what are the needs I see right now? And what's the biggest, boldest way I could go after helping people in those needs?
Yes.
And when you do that, yeah, it's almost like um, like I had my sister cut my hair for a long time and it was incredibly ugly and like incredibly. And I also thought like a blunt bob cut was really cool at the time, which pretty bold. And there was a lot of things that I just went without for a really long time. And it was like what was written in Hebrews 12 of like Jesus suffered, I'm not going to count my ugly haircuts like the cross, but let's just say symbolically, he endured the cross for the joy set before him.
Right.
And so, is your vision compelling enough to be the joy set before you,
Yes.
knowing that that vision should be making it on earth as it is in heaven, not just for yourself, but for the people you serve through it. And when
Right.
you have that vision, that's when I could like punch through a wall. And I hope other
Yes.
people can experience that too. One thing that I honestly don't resonate with as much
Mhm.
is the like following the peace. I've never really
Yeah.
understood that because as Timothy Keller, the late great pastor,
Mhm.
once said, people treat seeking peace as like an emotional and thummim, like
Yeah.
the biblical divination device that's
Yeah.
talked about in the Old Testament of like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm just gonna like seek in my heart and say like, is this yes or is this no? And
Yeah.
that's been hard for me and it hard
That's fair.
to trust, especially when in the Bible I see a lot of lack of peace actually with like
Maybe I can add
Moses.
clarity.
I would, yeah, I'm bringing up all these disagreements so you could
Yeah.
slay them.
This is great.
And so like Moses had no peace
Yeah.
over his calling. Jesus himself approaching the cross was losing
Yeah.
his cool a little bit. So I
Yeah.
think that I have depended less on a sense of peace and much more on a sense of conviction. Like
Yes.
in wisdom, do I think that this is the wisest thing to do with
Yes.
my life? And I could be totally freaked out and I'm okay with that.
That's great. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say peace in the sense that my emotions are calm. I would say peace in the sense that when I get to heaven and God says, "What'd you do with this decision?" I'm satisfied with my answer.
Oh,
And
I
it's
love
not,
that.
and it's not gonna be, you know what I mean? Like I'm not perfect. I've got issues, but it's like it's going to be the least bad answer that I can manage. You know what I mean? Like in my ability, it's like, this is what I chose to do with those resources. This is what I chose to do in this situation. And it's like it's a good answer. And of
Mhm.
course, we're not all going to have good answers in every situation, certainly not me, but that would be my in terms of peace because like if you're sacrificing, you're going to be tired. You're going to be exhausted. If you're going for a big vision, which I would encourage you to do, it's like 10 years of starting a business and running a business. And now there's like, I don't even know, like 15 people around here. It is exhausting and the emotions are up. You get a big client, you lose a big client. You might lose a client. It's like anxiety and anticipation and all this stuff. And that's not what I would say. It's like, no, I don't need my emotions to be calm. I don't, I trust those like half the time. But
Yeah.
it's more like, okay, number one, does the decision fall within the framework of the Bible? Yes. Okay. Is it wise? Just base level biblical wisdom. Yeah, it's probably wise. I'm not, throwing it all on black. Okay. Well, do I have counselors that, like for example, I have a mentor. Does what's my mentor say about this? And he actually happens to be a believer who also runs a marketing firm that's larger than mine.
Oh,
Okay, well,
nice.
well,
That's the
yeah,
best
that
kind of mentor
worked
to
out
have.
great. Yeah, good provision right there. But it's like, well, what would he say? And what does he say? And then um, after those things, it would be like, do I have peace in the sense that when I give an answer to God, God is going to be satisfied with the way I'm attempting to honor him in this decision. That's the way I would maybe better define peace. And then after that, these are decision making models from more of a scriptural perspective. Lastly, more of a miraculous one is, laying out the fleece like we would see with, oh my gosh, Gideon, correct?
Gideon?
Gideon and the fleece,
Yeah.
right? And I have absolutely seen the fleece work too, because it's like, well, I've got 48 hours to know what I'm doing, and none of those four prior things. And then, an example, we moved back to Hawaii. We were totally broke. I was like, there's no way we're going back to Hawaii. I mean, God's going to have to open the doors. The car is going to have to sell immediately because that's the funding we would have to use to get out. And, some guy in the parking lot's like, hey, do you want to sell your car?
Oh.
But, you know, so you've got some of those, but to that say, the piece is in addition to the other filters that we have. I'm not just saying like you just want to be Zen and like New Age all the time. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh my gosh. Then you and I have the exact same definition and appreciation for this sense of peace
Yeah.
then. Thank you so much for explaining that because, yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise I feel like exactly what you said, it just turns into a pursuit of a Zen sense of peace or
Yeah.
tranquility.
Right.
Tranquility, as you defined, is like really not the same as peace. And so that's
Right.
very good to remember. I just have to hear what are some of the books on your decision-making shelf because
Oh
I
yeah.
will look them up. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I think we should be telling everybody to have a decision-making shelf of books.
Oh yeah. It's my favorite topic along with strategy. And I think this kind of gets into another one of the subjects we were talking about earlier. And it's growth as it because we are talking about, I went into youth ministry. I couldn't grow the youth ministry. No matter what I did, it did not work until I started doing different stuff, and the kids are crazy and I've got the kids all jacked up on sugar. And one day I've got these four older guys, love them. And I took them out to coffee and I sat them down and I'm like, what's the goal, guys? Where are you going? You know, in the Hilo, Hawaii, there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of crack, there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of pot smoking. The gals get pregnant like 13, 14, 15, and then they
Wow.
work at the quickie mart for their whole life. And I
Wow.
I was asking them, I was like, is this what you want? You want to be their father dealt crack cocaine out their window, and the baggies would be on the ground when I pick them up for church. And so it's like, is that what you want for your life? And they're like, no, no, that's not what I want for my life. And I started saying, well, then you guys need to start getting it together. And, we need to make a plan and you need to start doing something. You need to get a job. You need to start acting responsibly at youth group. And these kids are just goofing around, just making chaos everywhere they go for 2 years that I'm doing youth ministry there. And then all of a sudden they just start flourishing, you know? And one of them is actually still the youth pastor there, right? Go figure. But
That's
well, what
amazing.
happened? What happened that they grew? Well, I fell upon something that is just built into the world. And so what we're taught, I think, a lot of times in ministry is growth comes through miracles and growth comes through faith and prayer. And I think that's true. I think God can work miraculously, but a miracle by definition is the exception. So then how does growth work when it's not a miracle? Well, God created the universe, He created systems and processes. And if you just understand how that works, you can just use the system or the process. And, for example, with a tree, how do you get a tree to grow? Well, we don't pray for growth. We just know a tree grows when you put it in sun and you put fertilizer on it. And we used to know this in the church. This is just called natural revelation. We know about God through his creation. And I was telling you when we were having our conversation, most of the sciences came from Christians who discovered oceanography, the currents in the ocean in the Bible. And then they set out to go find the currents in the ocean. And then you have oceanography. God made the natural world. And yes, during the Enlightenment, the, what do you want to say, the secular world kind of took those sciences and secularized them. And also the church kind of let them have it. But we forgot that God made the world and he made all of the processes. And so, for example, on the decision making shelf, these are ways to conceptualize the world. They're not Christian books. But God made the world. So if the conceptualization of the world is accurate, then I can use it generally outside of God saying to do something spiritual or supernatural. I can use it to assess a decision and be like, well, is this generally wise in a Proverbs sort of way? Okay. So some of those books, I really love mental models. Anyone who's familiar with the investor Charlie Munger, who is recently passed, he has a lot of mental models and decision making models that I'd recommend understanding. And, in terms of growth and fruit in a worldly sense, he was one of the most successful stock market investors of all time, started with zero and ended with something like 80 billion. And so, again, I'm not making the case that we idolize wealth. Also, the models that he used to make decisions and to consider things through created growth, and we can apply those in other areas because we all live in the same world that God created. Okay, so mental models, these books, let me think here. I didn't know I was getting a question on books.
I know.
These are great. Okay, so these are really good. This is Farnham Street. I really enjoy them. And all this is it's called the Great Mental Models. And what a mental model is it's just a representation of reality from a particular field. So it might take a decision-making method from chemistry. Now, you don't have to know chemistry, you just need to know how they use that way of thinking. Or mathematics, for example. A lot of people would be familiar with the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. Well, I have made a lot of, let's say, financial success off the 80-20 rule when I took Tim Ferriss's advice and, made some harder rules knowing that 20% of my clients bring in 80% of my income. And the other 80% are eating up all my time and they don't really pay much money compared to and so I'm able to use that way of thinking to optimize and create more abundance. And do I think God is blessing that? Do I think God is moving through that? Yeah, because he made the system, but I'm just working the system. I would rather jump in a river. If someone told me I need to move 1 mile in a river, I'm just going to float. I'm not going to try to swim upstream. That's how you burn out. And so this is what happens. You can see where we're transitioning there in ministry. I work with ministry leaders all the time. They're exhausted.
Mhm.
I'm familiar with a homeschool group where a lot of the husbands are pastors and the wives don't know their husbands. They're not around and they're exhausted because they're burnt out. And that's totally normal in the church. Why? Because we're doing things in a way that it's not always intended to be done. And there are better and more efficient ways to do things, but decision making that can get us better results with less work. And So that's just, anyway, this is great mental models. I've got a number of them on money. This is a great book. I'll show you one here.
I'm
I would
excited.
definitely recommend Essentialism.
Oh yeah, that's a
That's
banger.
such a good book. But I read this and I mean, I was like, whoa, I can't believe that things could be ordered that well.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I do. I black shirt every day. People are wearing out. You run a business, you run a church, and you want to like make this many decisions. You get decision fatigue, you get exhausted. And I used to be in my I can't match. I'm like an analyst over here. I can't do style. I'm in there trying to figure out how to match a black shirt to anything, or a black hat to anything. I can't do it. But I'm burning out half my ability before I even sit down in the office. And it's just a black shirt and a black hat, and I get to work, and I don't waste a second in the morning, and I just get to winning in whatever God's got me doing. But there's a lot of things like that. My wife and I used to waste a whole day of the week driving into Honolulu to go shopping. And it's a nightmare because, it's busy, it's crazy. There's 9,000 people in there and it takes all day. You've got the kids, you're exhausted. That's a seventh of your life. That's 52
Yeah.
days a year. And then I was like, well, could we just get it delivered? And then sure enough, not only can they deliver it, I'm thinking it's going to be some expensive subscription. It's $8 for delivery. It costs $10 in gas just to get there. So you're telling me you're going to pay me to save 52 days a year? Well, that is a decision-making model. That is what we might call the half-life principle. How long until the decision that I made has to be remade? Well,
Mhm.
now I never have to remake a shopping decision because we just have the same thing ordered every week and it just shows up and I
Yeah.
save money. Like that is a win-win-win, you know?
Wow.
And
I think
so,
that in order to seek out these solutions and improvements, I think that you have to believe that you could have a
yes,
better life or that it's a godly thing to
yeah,
pursue improvements, which might seem like duh, but not really in my experience. A lot of
yeah,
Christians, I think I grew up with a lot of messaging around contentment.
yeah,
Spend all of your energy learning how to be more content.
yeah.
And I realized when I was in my like little quarter life crisis that I decided to fully switch over into spending my life the most faithfully that I could, which
Yeah.
includes like doing things that I'm good at. And the things that I'm good at, I probably enjoy, but
Mhm.
it seems so obvious to me now and like a God ordained thing. But in the past, I was so stuck on like, no, this like corporate job that I really don't like, this is quote where God has me.
Yeah,
And I heard that language passed around a lot. And I'm like, now I think I'm like a very high, focused more on being a high agency person,
yeah,
which is not something it feels almost like evil in Christian
yeah,
circles of like,
yeah.
um, oh, you can't be focused on just like deciding things and making them better or doing what you want.
Mhm.
You have to like leave everything, quote, up to God, which in practice actually just looks like not really making proactive decisions
Yeah,
and then blaming everything on God if it like goes wrong.
yeah.
And then a lot of another piece of language that flags to me that someone like myself in the past is stuck in this
Mhm.
way of thinking is waiting for an open door, or if things are a closed door, like I
Mhm.
get one rejection, then I'm done. Like this, I'm not meant
Right.
for this. But I think so much of the Bible is like throwing your shoulder into the door
Yeah,
and like keep trying. Like Moses had to go back to Pharaoh nine
yeah.
times.
Well, and yeah, and let me speak to that because you're right. There is a balance. So okay, so one way to think about growth is through systems. Okay. And as an entrepreneur, I build systems. I learn how to do a thing and then I systematize it so I can go build something other over there that's bigger than the last system. And I put other people in charge of that. So, okay. Well, there are two types of systems. There are open systems and closed systems. A closed system is when there's no influence from the outside. Okay. So, for example, an atheist thinks the universe is a closed system. There is no God. So, everything has to be explained within the universe. Okay. So, that would be an example of a closed system. Now, as believers, we believe in an open system where, yeah, are there laws and processes like physics? If I'm not going to go to the top of my roof and jump off and say, Jesus, take the wheel. That's foolish, right? Because God made gravity. Well, do I also believe that in certain situations, God will decide to intervene beyond the laws of physics? Sure thing. That's called a miracle. But I still believe there's a system. And so the question is how do we balance the dependence on the miraculous with using the system as it was designed to be used? And I mean, you look at Genesis and it's, be fruitful and multiply, and it's like, is the human multiplication process miraculous? Absolutely. And also, am I praying for miracles? Like, no, like there's a process, so it's like God made a, so the question is how much do we lean on the system and how much do we lean on God? And I think the question is both all the time. And so as
Mm-hmm.
I'm going through my day, and this is, something I've learned fairly recently because I'm very ambitious. I'm very motivated. And it's like, I've got this, God, you can go help someone else. I'm going to put my shoulder through the door, and he's not letting me do that. He didn't let me do that for a long time. He's like, nope, you're going to go with me, you know? But now it's like, good morning. What are we doing? What's the first thing? How do I handle this? How do I handle that? This is making me feel really anxious. Thank you that you've got it under control. What's the way that we should respond to this? So it's every step, it's with God. Thank you that you're going to provide. And then also, what am I doing? The very best I can do in every decision. That doesn't mean I get them right, but with all of the resources that I have, with all of the, whatever I know, I'm going to do the best I can with God. And
Mm-hmm.
then what happens? Well, you know, how do I say this? I'm not sitting around on the couch eating potato chips, praying for the Lord to save the children. And also, because that's the faith model that I think we learn in ministry and church a lot. That's what they taught me with youth ministry. And also, I'm not doing it without God and I'm not trying to power through. So I get to be high performance and I get to do it with God. And when my high performance isn't enough, and if you've got a really big vision, it can't be enough. But when my high performance isn't enough, then God can come in and he can do whatever he's going to do. And I get to work with him. And so I think there's a balance there. And I think that, we need to be in the world and not of the world. I need to know how the system, I live on planet Earth. And as much as I would like to float around on a cloud, it's like, I got to know how to make a decision in real life. And I'm not of the world. So I need to know how to discern the will of God as well, because I have the cheat code. All of the people who are building wealth in a worldly way and building, success, whatever that means for them, do I think God is like actively helping them? Probably not. They're probably just using the system and God's letting them use the system, and that's okay. But I do have God, and God gives me the cheat code because, if my will is aligned with his will, he's probably going to push me faster if I'm really genuinely aligned with him, right? That's the open part of the system. So I'm going to work just as hard as the secular people, given that, it's in alignment, it's not overwork, because you can be crazy. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let God bless me. So I'm in the world. I understand the world just like, you know, I understand how it works. And I am not of the world. I am shrewd as a serpent and I'm innocent as a dove. I
I
understand
love
there.
that line.
Yeah. Well, you never heard anybody preach a sermon on shrewd as a serpent, but you've heard the innocent as a dove. Well, we have to
Yeah.
be innocent and we have to show Jesus. And it's like, well, Jesus was shrewd, man. He walked into the temple and he's flipping tables. He knows how this thing works. He knows the enemy is in the world. He knows that it's fallen and there's flesh. And when you go into business, you're going to get taken advantage of. You're going to come up against the hard stuff. If you're going on missions, you better be comfortable with seeing some tough stuff because
Mm-hmm.
you're in the world. You need to be shrewd. You need to be aware that the enemy is prowling around like a roaring lion, and you better be ready to grapple with him and think strategically. How are you going to win a battle with the enemy when you just toss it into the wind? Like, don't get me wrong, we want to depend on God. And also, I just got out of a call yesterday with scammers from the Philippines, and boy, they were good. I had my whole team on the call. And I kid you not, we did research on the whole website. It's a magazine and it's for an educators. It is such a good scam. The only reason I could even spot it was because we researched all of the marketing and all of the SEO and all of the website and just a bunch of backdoor stuff that marketers do. And they were telling us stuff that weren't true to the data. And but just looking at their website and looking at their operation, I couldn't tell. And they wanted $3,000. So it's shrewd. And my interns were shocked. They were like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh. Like I was figuring it out in real time in the call because what
That's
they were
awesome.
saying was not true. And so it's shrewdness. Like I'm not, you're not going to pull the wool over my eyes
Mhm.
easily, at least, and if you can and I'm doing my best, well, then God's going to make up the rest.
Yeah, I am so glad this is recorded because I could like set that to a little track and listen to it while I'm
Yeah.
like boxing or something. That is so
Yeah.
motivating. The
Yeah.
word shrewd in general is one of my freaking favorites. I
Yeah.
like the verse about, like you were saying, be as innocent as a dove, but as shrewd as a snake, or swap that
Yeah.
in order. And the parable that you quoted a verse from at the beginning of our conversation is the parable of the shrewd manager
There
of
you go.
using wealth to, how did you say it? Using wealth to gain friendships.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Use the passages. Yeah, use your earthly wealth to buy friendship, so you're welcomed into eternal abodes or something like that. You have
wow.
friends in heaven because you provide for them here where it's hard.
Wow. I have similarly never heard and this is kind of a joke with my husband and I. We're like, you know what? We're just waiting for the day that we walk into a church and hear a sermon on the parable of the shrewd manager. I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah,
Um, but it
yeah.
should. So I think, and that also ties into my compliment that I gave at the beginning of our conversation too, is like I could tell from the beginning you were very shrewd, and I just respect that so much as a fellow Christian that craves to see more of that in our culture. Like I love your like you can't pull one over on me energy,
Yeah.
and I admire it because I think we should be more like that. Don't be a sucker.
Yeah,
So because
yeah.
it's easy to be, and I gosh. Well, now I want you to be my mentor, but I will take this conversation at least and cherish it. And
Of course.
what is like a something that you want to underscore for from our conversations to leave the listeners with of like what do you really want them to take from this?
I think ultimately, my heart is for the church. Um, I've been in ministry and there is a bubble. And if you're in ministry or if you've been in ministry and you're like, there's no bubble, it's because you're in it. You must be 100%. There's a bubble. And I love the church. And, the church is the bride of Christ. And I've been out of ministry and I have seen how ministries function and how Christian businesses function. And I've seen how secular businesses function. And secular businesses are better. And it's because they understand how the world functions and they just use it to their advantage. And over in ministry, we do all kinds of things that don't make sense. And I would love to wrap up with maybe a super fast version of the 5 things Jesus does to create growth and kind of
Yeah.
show you, yeah. And I want to show the opportunity that Christian business leaders and Christian ministry leaders have to create growth because we do it backwards, like almost exactly backwards. We don't do it the way Jesus did it. So Jesus does essentially 5 things. When I got into marketing with ClickMail, I was like, do churches even need marketing? Is this biblical? Does Jesus do marketing? And so I read the New Testament like a bunch of times. And Jesus does 5 things. Number one, he knows who his audience is. I'm checking my notes. He goes out to them. He meets a deeply felt need. And this is a physical need, not a spiritual need like for salvation. He does not walk in the room and kick in the door and start saying, I'm the Lord, worship me, you need my salvation. He didn't do that. He meets a physical need. Then he shifts the conversation from the physical need to the spiritual need. That's 4. And then he calls them to action. Okay. So there's a lot of marketing and there's a lot of influence in there. Okay. So as an example, I'll give an example and then we'll look at how the church does it. Okay. Number one, he's goes to Gennesaret and he's looking. He sees the Peter, James, and John on the boat. He sees that they have it. He knows them. He gets it. He's like, okay, they're fishermen. They're on a boat. It's morning. They're cleaning their nets. There's no fish. That's his target audience. Okay, that makes sense. He goes and he meets a deeply felt need. Well, what's the need? He gives them physical fish because they're fishermen with no fish. Okay, so that's important. So he knows who they are because he sees them. He goes to where they're at. He doesn't just go to Gennesaret, which it says. He goes down to the beach. He gets on their boat. So he's like right up in their grill. And then he meets the deeply felt need, the physical need. Then he transitioned. And this is the powerful part because I think this is what we missed. They're all powerful, but this is a powerful part. He takes the physical need that they know they have and he says, transition to the spiritual need. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Well, what's a fisher of men? They don't know. And he does this to the woman at the well as well. Well, if you knew who you were talking to, you'd ask me for water and I'd give you living water that never runs dry. She doesn't know what he's talking about. Where you don't have a bucket, you don't have a rope. And right after that story, the disciples are talking about food. Lord, we went and we got lunch. And he's like, I have food you know nothing about. Well, he just took the physical food they understand the value of and turns it into spiritual food. And now we're having a different and why does he do it? Because the world doesn't know they need God. The world is lost. They don't understand. So if our church is focused and the only thing we do is say, come to church for a sermon, you are like by definition non-essential. The world killed Jesus and the world kills Christians because they hate the truth. And if the thing you're offering right out the front is the truth, it's not going to go well. And so we have to meet a need they know they have. Okay, so how do we do this in the church? So Jesus knows his audience. When I work with ministry leaders in marketing, well, who's your audience? Everyone. No, it can't be. What
Yeah.
and what I'll hear is the verse, how good are the feet that spread the good news? And that's true, but those feet go to someone. And you got to know who that person is. Paul goes to the Areopagus and he studies and he chooses a particular, the altar of the unknown God to insert his message. It's a very apologetic approach. The books of the New Testament are written to specific churches with specific problems. The books of the Bible know their audience. Jesus talks to the Jews. He's not talking to everyone. So we have to know our audience. And then we have to go to them. So the church thinks we talk to everyone, but what do we do with church? We expect them to come to us. Oh, you have to come to church. Well, that's not biblical. So we have to go to them. In church, we expect them to come to us. We have to meet a deeply felt need. And this, I think, is the most important one. Because I agree with the church, and I'm just speaking broadly. This is not all churches. Some churches are very good at these types of things. But I agree that the biggest need people have is the gospel message. And also, like, people don't know they need that. So if you want people to come to you, you've got to give them something they need on the front end. And in marketing, we call this a lead magnet. And so to that end, during COVID, I saw this in play. We had clients that worked with us, great pastors, well-intentioned, sharing the gospel, and their churches went out of business, and I went out of business, went out of church, however you want to say it. And why? Well, the government, at least in the United States, said, well, ministries and churches are non-essential. And I heard a lot of great arguments. Well, we have the right to assemble. We have the freedom of religion. This is illegal. This is like all this stuff. And all that stuff may be true. And I don't have an issue with any of that. But the problem is that when you think about reality, if someone can come in and shut your church down, and society, your community, whoever it is you're reaching out to, they can move on and they're not pounding down your door to open it back up, you are actually non-essential because you weren't meeting a need. And to kind of give an example about that, and I mean a physical need, we're meeting the need spiritually, but if they can just shut down, and an example would be like churches that fund rehabilitation centers for drug and alcohol. We didn't hear about any of those getting shut down because as soon as that gets shut down, who has to do it? The government. So it's like, well, okay, you guys can stay open because you're essential. Well, why are they essential? Because they're actually essential in reality. Someone is dependent on the gift. You didn't hear about the homeless programs getting shut down because why? Because the government has to take care of the homeless if the churches aren't doing it. So the churches need to provide for a physical, real need. And Jesus says the same, take care of the widows and the orphans, because then people understand that we're grounding, we're taking care of something they understand. And then we can shift it into the spiritual and they'll actually want to hear us because they know we care about them. And so, you get a question, you like those fish, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Why do you have this ministry to help me with alcohol? And I'm just, example, it's like you got someone at this rehabilitation center. Why do you guys do this? Why do you put your money into helping us with our alcohol and drug rehabilitation? Well, we want you to have freedom from drugs because our God gives us freedom too, but that's freedom from sin. And if you want to learn about that, we'd love to tell you about that too. Well,
Yeah.
now I can understand what you're talking about if I'm someone who doesn't know God. And so, in the church, a lot of these things are flip-flopped. We don't know our audience. We think we talk to everyone when we don't. we expect people to come from us. We don't meet a deeply felt need, and so we can't transition and then go to the spiritual because we just started there. And then people just feel like we're criticizing them because we're just approaching them with advice that they don't want and they don't know they need. So I think that's I think our intention in the church is awesome. And I think also because we don't know the systems and the processes and human nature like we used to, we can't use those to the advantage of the kingdom and building the kingdom. And so a lot of things end up being ineffective and very difficult to grow. And so maybe that brings it around full circle. Now I grow our internship program, I grow ministries, and I just use an equation in advertising. And I grow Christian schools, kids going into the Christian school because I know how to run an equation and do ads and do some calculations. And I'm not hoping, I mean, I am hoping and praying and, having faith for growth. That's true. And also I'm using God's creation and the way he intended it to be used to get the growth as well. So, yeah, those are some things that I'm really passionate about. And I think there's opportunities for your listeners to get growth in.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that this is even more of a point as to why Christians should feel not just unashamed, but very emboldened in their so-called secular work.
Yeah.
That in the first 300 to 400 years of the church, its primary growth in membership came from its members. You couldn't even come into the church until you were baptized. Like you couldn't gather in these like illegal meetings until you had already given yourself to Christ. So how could you even get through the door? A disciple made you a disciple.
Yeah.
And the way that we do that per this really thoughtful step-by-step equation that you were talking about is we meet physical needs through engineering and nursing and marketing and
Yeah.
every job that there is pretty much, let's call it all everyday work, as Tim Keller said, obvious
Yeah.
exceptions apply, is there because there is a need and we get to be in those jobs and serve them. And also by using to tie together our conversation and what I learned from you, like our decision making frameworks and wisdom that we demonstrate through those and the fruit that we demonstrate by using those, we can become winsome to say, it create maybe an opening to invite someone into the spiritual, like you said, through like building trust. And so I just feel like it's incredibly purposeful to be in all sorts of work and to care about success. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Brent. Brett, I really, really cherish this conversation and thank you so much for the years of wisdom that you packed into whatever it is, 50, 60 minutes. This is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to work with you or even hear about your internship program if that happens to be open?
Yeah, absolutely. Over at clickmill.co. Click like you click a mouse and mill like a windmill. We great clicks. Clickmill.co. We have an internship tab. And if you want to book a call, you're looking at maybe getting into some marketing for your Christian school, private school, Christian business or ministry. I'd love to talk with you. You can book a call right on the website.
Yeah, you won't be disappointed. I could say from personal experience. So, yeah, thanks again, and God bless you.
You too. You too. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. To get an even more meaningful head start into your calling, head to thecalledcareer.com, where my fellow career coach Audrey and I have created a whole suite of free resources and tools to help you get clear and get a job today. For those who are definitely ready to land a job or start a business in the next 6 to 12 months, we're here to help you biblically and practically discern your calling through coaching, reflection, and deep market research. Identify the job that's aligned with it, even if you currently have no idea what you want. Rebrand your resume and LinkedIn to translate your background to appeal to your future boss. P.S. We take this off your plate and do this for you. Also, we'll teach you how to land referrals and get attention from leadership through networking. Again, if that makes you nervous, we have these emails and LinkedIn messages literally written for you so you don't have to sweat. We're also here to give you unlimited interview practice so you're prepared to address every elephant in the room and knock selling yourself out of the park. Then we'll round out with helping you negotiate your salary so you land thousands more. Just so you know, Recent clients have gotten $8,000 to $50,000 salary increases, even though they were totally non-traditional candidates. That's because we specialize in helping non-traditional career pivoters land jobs they're ecstatic to serve in. It takes work, but we're here to see you through until the end, when we're celebrating that day that you send me an email in all caps and you say, Kelsey, I got the job. Then you could be on the podcast. But I'll be here until then, keeping you accountable and encouraged by meeting with you literally until you land the job you want, even if that's up to 6 months from now within our program. Apply to join at thecalledcareer.com, and I'll see you next week here at Answer the Call. Bye for now.